Cypress Hills grasslands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise to speak on this great Opposition Day motion that we have, and I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for moving this motion that we are debating here today. Many different things have happened over the last 2 or 3 years, Mr. Speaker, and that's brought us to where we are at here today with a very particular focus that we have on the Arrivescam app. As it says, we need to show respect for taxpayer dollars, which is more fundamentally based on respect for the rights of our fellow Canadians. An essential part of Parliament's role is to hold the government accountable for its spending, along with its policy decisions, regardless of the party that's in power. And that is exactly what the motion calls for, nothing more. Hopefully, all members from all parties in this House can agree with that idea, including Liberals who sit on the government side. We will have to wait and see the result of the vote because the issue in question has to do with the controversial Arrivescam app. But what this motion does is call for the Auditor General to conduct a performance audit. And that is something different from this House expressing our approval or disapproval towards a specific government policy. It's not even a committee study. Instead, this would be an independent review that takes the issue away from partisan debates between the government and the opposition. This would address the need for some necessary accountability, though, because we cannot pretend that nothing really happened with the Arrivescam app over the last 2 years. And if the government's truly confident that they have made the right decisions along the way, then they should have no problem supporting this particular motion. In the end, it would prove their case with no problems, and I hope that point has been clearly understood. So here we are today, 1 month after the government eventually decided to drop the mandatory use of the Arrivescam app, but that does not alone mean that all issues have been resolved. We do not have the whole story, and many of the questions that Canadians have are left unanswered. Why did the federal government mandate it in the first place? Why were Canadian citizens required to download and use an app to enter their own country? Why was there a lack of accommodation or flexibility? Why did it take so long for the government to finally drop the mandate? Why did it cost $54 million to create, when it has since been shown that it could have been made for as low as $250,000 and was originally projected for only $80,000? Who exactly benefited or profited from paying out all these millions of dollars? This is what all members need to know on behalf of their constituents all across this country. While we're having this debate, Mr. Speaker, we also cannot forget all the impacts this mandated app has had on all Canadians. The government's tried to claim that this was somehow about vaccination, to turn the issue against those who did not receive COVID vaccines. But the reality is that we saw how this mandate affected different people regardless of their medical status. And Arrivescam took it a step beyond the other problems involved with vaccine mandates for work and for travel. It created yet another barrier for new groups of people in our society, which relates to the technology used. But if the government wants to defend their decision by making it all about vaccines, then they are at least revealing part of the unfortunate truth by saying so. They have essentially admitted that their intention was to punish the unvaccinated, which came with a suggestion to the wider public that doing so would stop transmission. This might have worked to scapegoat and divide people during and after a snap election, but the mandate didn't do what they said it would do. And of course, it's true that the app was clearly part of a broader policy which undermined and violated Canadians' right to medical privacy. What was the result? Although the Prime Minister might not understand this fact, regular people have many reasons to travel besides taking luxurious vacations. These mandates devastated careers and relationships for people. Some of them were unvaccinated, while others did not disclose that they are vaccinated for privacy reasons, because that was the issue at stake. And this government chose to keep it in place, while it became more apparent over time that their excuse for it was flawed. But again, the Arrivescam requirement took all this to a new level. It made the situation more comical, more complicated, and nonsensical. There were people who could show their papers, but their personal circumstances did not allow for them to use Arrivescam. Some do not have the right technology. Some of them just simply weren't able to use it, or maybe they didn't have ready access to it for practical reasons. In a lot of cases, we're talking about seniors or minorities who found that their government added an arbitrary barrier under the vaccine mandate. These are our fellow Canadians who live in my riding and in every other riding, including those belonging to Liberal members, and I'm sure that they have heard similar stories from constituents as I have. As an example, I had someone reach out to my phone from one of the many Hutterite colonies who don't use technology, don't have access to computers, and their options for other access are limited. This individual was vaccinated and could cross the border into the United States, but upon returning to Canada was forced to quarantine simply because he was not using the Arrivescam app and didn't have the means to even have the app in the first place. It didn't make any sense to him, and Mr. Speaker, I agreed with him. There are also a number of seniors in a similar situation who are forced to quarantine, even though they could otherwise prove their vaccination status under the rules. This had consequences that were more than a mere inconvenience. People were confined to their homes. In the case of the constituent I mentioned, their community's lifestyle is based on agriculture and food production, and this would have disrupted his ability to contribute to this important type of work that they need to get done. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this member of this community was down in the States getting parts that they needed for their agricultural machinery, their agricultural implements, to be able to perform what the government at the time had actually deemed to be an essential service, but yet they still told him he had to go home for 14 days anyway. Farmers know that you can't afford to lose valuable time for up to 2 weeks. And Mr. Speaker, their work, as we all know, is isolated by nature. One person driving a machine, ranchers out checking their cattle, out checking their herds. There's zero risk for the communities around them. And this is another example yet of how the Liberals have zero understanding of what life is like out in rural Canada. But then it somehow got worse, Mr. Speaker. Not only was the app intrusive, but it had glitches. If you complied and used Arrivescam, you still weren't safe. There were people who were able and willing to use the app, but were still wrongly identified for quarantine time anyway. At one time, the Canada Border Services Agency said that these incorrect notifications went out to over 10,000 people. This was a disaster that was as embarrassing as it was confusing, and it went right along with the government's failure to provide Canadians with passports and with notoriously bad flight disruptions at our airports. But the Liberals dragged it on nonetheless. Despite the calls to end it from border communities, from tourism groups, border guard unions, and the public. And by the time they dropped this restriction, the travel season was all but over. My riding is along the border that we share with the United States, and tourism is an important part of our local economy. It also happens to be a rural area, which adds its own limitations to the situation. And from that perspective, I can assure everyone here that there is real damage done to these communities because of these misguided policies. What makes it worse is that we knew from common sense that the extra burden and impracticality for tourism, for agriculture, and our other local industries wasn't necessary. There were all kinds of Canadians who paid a price for the Prime Minister and the Liberal government to save face or score political points. Fortunately, they couldn't ignore the mounting pressure any longer, and they dropped their requirements at the border, which was the right thing to do. But there are still some challenges remaining to our citizens and to our border communities. One such example, Mr. Speaker, is that the hours of operation still have not returned to normal. And in one such example, Mr. Speaker, I had a constituent who had a 2-hour trip to get his cattle to the vet in the U.S. and back, turned into a 14-hour trip because he wasn't allowed to come back over the border. And we have regulations in this country that limit how long animals can be in a trailer, and this simple decision put him at risk of having to spend even more time on the road, away from home, risking the health of his animals as he was traveling. Canadians can once again fully exercise the spirit of their charter rights to remain in, enter, or leave Canada. We also no longer restrict international travelers from coming here, but the United States still has a vaccine mandate at their border for our citizens. And that's their decision to make. Our government obviously can't make it for them. But does the Prime Minister care to advocate and stand up for the same Canadians who he has demonized and marginalized over the past 2 years? The Liberals have not acknowledged what they did wrong. There has not yet been an expression of regret or apology. But one way for them to show some goodwill would be to support this motion. There are a lot of strong opinions on these issues both inside and outside of Parliament. But if we at least agree to this, we could start to focus on getting more of the facts involved with the divisive policy. That is something that the Auditor General could provide. We can get a better idea of what happened and learn to do better in the future. Canadians could see some unity and leadership across party lines in this place. Hopefully, this would set a good example and help to heal the divisions that we have in this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Questions?